Hi there, we're going to talk a little bit more about cables today, so I hope you can see this okay. I'll bring it up a little bit closer. So this here is the design of a typical cable with the outer jacket, and then there's an inner mesh screen that surrounds the conductors usually. These are then insulated, and this is the positive and the negative conductors. Now some cables will use just one center conductor, and they'll use this outside screen as the earth return. Now that's cheaper to make, but it doesn't give you the protection from exterior electromagnetic fields, etc., that it does if you have these two. And the reason is that these three conductors, if you have the positive and the negative for your earth return, and then you have this screen, and you earth the screen at one end, not at both ends, just at one end, then that's called floating that screen. But that will pick up any noise that is coming through an electromagnetic, external, RF, etc., and shunt it to earth without affecting your signal unduly. I say unduly because with an RCA plug, you can never really get free of that problem. With an XLR, if you have a look at my little diagram over here, with an XLR you have a different setup. You have a positive and you have a negative, as well as a separate screen or earth. Now in an XLR, because you've got a signal which is positive going and negative going, you will have more signal than you will have in a RCA, typically 3 to 6 dB difference, and you can have what is called a differential circuit, where the signals that are an opposing half of the waveform, one is put through an inverter at the end to compare to the other half of the waveform, and the two basically cancel out any differences which could be distortion or noise. So you'll always get a far quieter performance with a balanced XLR than you will with a standard RCA. So that's my little extra bit of information about RCA cables. Of course, take this a bit further and you could put a quad cable in there and have 4 conductors and twist them, and so therefore lower the resistance and theoretically at least reduce the inductance and capacitance. So that's as simple as I want to keep it today, but bear in mind that when you have a signal that is going through any cable, that cable is open to interference from other cables. So the worst thing you can do is to be nice and neat with all your cables and tie the power cords and the signal cables and the speaker cables in one bundle going up the back of your rack, because then you're really encouraging inductance from one cable to another and extra noise in your system. I'm going to say something that sounds a bit weird, but when cabling is concerned, being messy is okay. And by messy I mean if you've got cables crossing, the best way to have them crossing is at right angles to each other, particularly with power cables. So if you're running them down the side of your rack, run the cables down the side of your rack by all means, but keep the power cables on one side of your rack and run them across the shelf. And then wherever you've got an RCA cable or a speaker cable, cross that power cable at a right angle. And then you will minimize the noise that you pick up in your system. So just another little tip to help wring out a bit more performance from your system. Remember, the lower the noise floor in your system, the more you will hear fine detail and the better it will sound.
But someday, baby, you ain't gonna worry my life no more. So many nights since you've been gone away, I'm worried and I'm feeling my good Hurts me so bad for us to part. But someday, baby, you ain't gonna work.
Now this album by Dutch Tilders, recorded live in Sydney, live to a stereo 2-track in November of 1976, so almost 44 years ago. Very live. The recording surface is not that great, it's an Australian pressing, but hey, great recording of some really interesting music. A friend of mine in Dunedin challenged me to post on Facebook, on my story feed, a picture of albums that have influenced me. So I've been doing that every day, so I thought I'll play one of those albums. This is from, I think, about 1972, The Doors. You'll probably know the music, so I won't introduce it. If you don't know the music, then you've obviously not been listening to much music in the last 40 years. But anyway, this is from 1972, The Doors, and it was one of those albums that at the time was sort of quite influential to me in my music choices.
Riders of the storm, riders of the storm, into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone. Riders of the storm, there's a killer on the road. His brain is squirming like a toad. Take a long holiday. Let your children play. If you give this man a ride, sweet
Yep, legendary Jim Morrison, who could forget music like that. So yeah, we're going to be playing some oldies. Seems like pretty much every second album I pulled out today was had the date 1972 on it, so it must have been when I started getting into music pretty seriously. What would I have been then? 19 years old. So yeah, lovely times, great times, awesome music. The golden era of rock music, I think, would be the 70s. Just a little story to finish off. I'll post a picture of my first electronics project, which was when I was 9 years old. My dad brought me home a 9-transistor radio. This would have been probably around 1961, 62, somewhere around there. And it was a kit set, and so I set about trying to put it together. We had a soldering iron which was massive. The tip would have been probably about the size of my thumb, and you had to heat it up on the gas ring of the stove. So and then rush to the circuit board while it was still hot and try to get this massive tip onto the tiniest little connections you could see on this little board. It was about probably the size of my phone, but a lot thicker. And I toiled away at that for a few weeks and finally got it going. And that little 9-transistor radio lasted me all the way from the UK, travelling overland to India, and then on across Australia and to New Zealand, and I still had that when I was about 15 or 16 years old. And I used to connect up the battery used to go flat quite quickly. It was one of those little square 9-volt batteries, so I managed to bludge some big PT6 cells off the post office lineman and had them all strapped together to make 9 volts, and had that huge battery system hooked into this tiny little radio. It was really only that big, and that was my source of music for years. I can remember listening to Radio Hauraki into the small hours of the night, waking up in the morning to shh coming through the speaker because it had stopped transmission at some time in the morning, and it was sitting there. It was an AM/FM radio, and to get better AM performance down in Turangi, or south of Turangi, we actually lived at Rangipo at the time, I got some wire off the post office faultman and climbed up the pine tree behind the house, tossed out this coil of wire and ran it across into my bedroom. And every time there was a storm and the trees moved around, the wire would snap and I'd have to go and join it up and keep my AM radio going. So that was how I got introduced to a lot of music, was through Radio Hauraki and an AM radio that I built at age 9 or so. So good times from there on in. It got me into my music, and it's never left me as a passion since I was that age. So to all those younger people out there, follow your passion in life. Cheers, and thank you for watching.